All right, today we're talking about the Nvidia 30 series graphics cards again, except not from a hardware perspective. That video was yesterday or earlier today, depending on when you watch this or when I post everything and how things are going. Today we're talking about the Nvidia Broadcast software. This is software that they released alongside these graphics cards to filter out your voice for background sound or your chat member's voice for background sound, as well as remove your background and put you in front of any background or blur it out or whatever. It's really cool software, and I could not fit everything I wanted to cover in that one video, so I'm making a second video about it. Let's go. So this is Nvidia Broadcast. This was formerly RTX Broadcast, but they're renaming it, even though this specific software does actually require you to have an RTX card, unlike the RTX Voice that they officially opened to all GTX cards as well. This was shown at TwitchCon 2019 and seemingly never heard from again. Until now. It combines RTX Voice with a virtual green screen app, both built on lots of AI training models, and provides some really powerful tools for streamers. It still needs some work, but it's a fantastic start, and I can't wait to see where it goes. And also, I just can't wait to see when it gets added to video editors for post work, because I think there's some huge potential there. Just to be clear, this is not analyzing and sending back your video or audio to AI to then judge on the fly and change and learn as you go. It's trained in advance and improves as more training can be done. That was a weird myth that was getting spread when the original RTX Voice launched. I don't know what happened there. This is, of course, a work in progress from a small team. Please give any feedback or contribute samples for training at broadcast.nvidia.com/feedback. All right, let's walk through the software. Nvidia Broadcast is this little app with 3 tabs, 2 for voice and 1 for video. Let's start on voice. Formerly RTX Voice, though officially opened up to all Nvidia cards with varying results this past week, the audio portion of Nvidia Broadcast is designed to help filter out unwanted noise from your microphone or from voice chat if you have the hardware for that. It has a quirk. This is built on AI training of voices and microphones versus environmental sound to filter out just the voice in a way that, at least in my previous round of testing, I found to be way higher quality and more natural sounding than the results from most real-time noise suppression or noise removal options. It's quite impressive, as you can see here. Here's a vacuum. The vacuum is running. 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 You'll always have some impact on the vocal sound due to frequencies matching between whatever background sound and your voice, but cutting out a vacuum is crazy. And yes, I was the first one to do this on a YouTube video. Everyone else seemed to just rip me off and then got all the credit. Oh well. This does work best with cardioid microphones, such as desktop streaming mics or headset mics. It works less well on boom mics and even worse on omnidirectional mics, such as lav mics. I will have more testing of this in the future, I just haven't had time yet. For microphone settings, choose your microphone device as an audio source from the list, toggle on the noise removal, and set the strength of the filter. They even provide a neat little tool to record and play back a clip of your voice to see how the filter affects it. So you apply it normally, listen to it, then increase the strength, listen to it again till you get to a sweet spot that gets you what you want. Pretty straightforward. That's it. For speakers, you do the same thing, but with an audio output device. This is for voice chats or conference calls if someone has a lot of background noise or keyboard sound or something really obnoxious. They have simple background sounds available to play back as WAV files, so you can hear how the strength of the filter affects them to get, a sweet spot of where you want so that it's not too overbearing. However, a problem you may run into with the speakers is that unless you're purely doing a voice chat setup for your audio, you don't have any other sound going on, you'll need a dedicated output for your voice chat to run through, because otherwise it'll filter out every other sound coming through your system, your game sound, your music, your video you're watching, anything. So if you're using a physical hardware mixer or separate output runs or something like voice meter software, that's fine. But if you have everything running to one device, that will present a problem. It's also a problem for the Go XLR, as the filtered sound is actually presented as a separate output device that you then listen to, not added back into the original output device. That wouldn't work, so then you can't add it to your Go XLR. The Elgato Wave microphones, however, do not have this problem because you can add devices to the software. Then you have the camera beta tab. Here you select your camera source, the resolution and frame rate to run it at, your effect, and a preview of it happening. Currently, it mostly supports UVC devices only, so devices that present as webcams. This is mostly limited to actual webcams, but of course it also includes capture cards that present as UVC devices as well, including the Camlink, the Magewell USB cards, the Extreme Cap UVC, the HD60S Plus, as well as the Cloner Alliance Flint 4KP Plus I reviewed, as well as the $15 Cantlink that I made a video on and has since spread over the summer like crazy. That's also UVC, and so with those UVC capable capture cards, you can use your real camera with HDMI like I am here in order to run it through Nvidia Broadcast, so that's fine. More expanded capture card support will be added in time, and I really hope, and I'm gonna hammer home that I really want them to add proper support for Blackmagic capture cards, as these present differently than most capture cards and are usually left out, but literally all of my camera outputs run through Blackmagic cards, and I really don't want to get left behind because they don't want to support it. The resolution and frame rate that you choose impacts the workload of the neural network related cores on the graphics card in order to produce the image. So if you're only doing a small facecam view in the corner of your stream, you'll want to run it at a lower resolution so that it will have to work less and impact your game performance even less, or have better performance for the processing overall. I have not found lower resolutions to significantly impact the quality of the effect at all, but there will be some differences by nature of there being less detail, being resolved. It does run at 4K though, so that's pretty cool. There's 4 effects to choose from for your camera: background blur, background replacement, background removal, and auto frame. Unfortunately, auto frame cannot be run at the same time as other effects. Background blur is fairly self-explanatory. It blurs out everything but you and gives you that faux bokeh depth of field look that I have right here. This isn't faux though, this is the real thing. If I get close, you can see it change. That's what a wide aperture lens does. It's especially convincing to use to enhance an already somewhat blurred out background from a lens from a mirrorless or DSLR camera. So if you have a real camera and it has some degree of background blur, but not as much as you would like, you can enhance that with this feature, and it looks a lot more natural because any kind of imperfections are going to blend in a little bit more because it's already somewhat blurred out. So that's pretty cool. You all know by now that my office is also a living room where most of our baby furniture is, since that's where he spends most of his time, and a garage with my server rack and workbench behind it. So whenever I need to record videos in that space, background blur is actually really useful here. There's a slider to control the intensity of the blur. Background replacement removes your background entirely and places an image behind you. I use Jensen's Kitchen, provided in the Nvidia community pack, linked below. I recommend making sure that your image is decently blurred. You can add that blur effect in Photoshop or GIMP or Krita or whatever as you like. As a super sharp image, especially one that's more sharp than say your webcam, is very distracting and much less appealing to look at. Background removal just removes your background and gives you a transparency compatible video that you can add to your streaming program and add your stream without using actual chroma keying. So why would you use background replacement over removal? Well, for video calling and direct recording of video or vlogging scenarios where transparency won't be maintained. The full removal gives you more control to manage in your streaming app, but in a video call or direct recording, all of that transparency is lost, so you need to already have something presented behind you. So that's where that comes in handy. Auto framing is pretty cool. It will zoom in a bit and otherwise move your video feed around based on panning the shot around to keep yourself focused and in the center of the frame, regardless of how much you move or shake or whatever. You get a slider to control how much the initial zoom or crop factor is so that it has more room to work with within your frame. So I recommend using a higher resolution image with that if possible. It's pretty cool. Some people like it. Unfortunately, you can't do this and remove your background at the same time. I realize that could look pretty silly, but some people might want to. You can't. Nvidia Broadcast lives in your system tray and gives you a quick and easy right-click menu option to toggle camera, speaker, and microphone settings on or off in case they're impacting your game too much, which I kept having happen in Modern Warfare, or if you have any issues or whatever, you can quickly toggle them off. Next, let's talk quality. We're going to focus on the video side of things, as I've already talked about voice in multiple videos at this point. I'll have my samples linked in the video description. Overall, the results from Nvidia Broadcast for the background adjustment are pretty great. Depending on what's in your background of your actual shot, the results can be beyond impressive. When it's really working, it feels revolutionary. Some of the clips where I'm only really lit by my computer monitors and using a crappy C930E webcam are so incredibly impressive, it's been hard to keep this a secret until the embargo lifts. But it's not perfect. It does struggle with some of the same artifacting issues that most virtual background removal software do struggle with. I have found darker backgrounds to work better than lighter ones, as too many bright colors or shapes behind you can cause chunks of things to be detected along with you. Also, having a second person behind you can confuse it a whole heck of a lot. It's built for one streamer. For example, in terms of how it works, I've been using it on my gaming side where I have much less going on in the background. It's just our desk and the wall in the kitchen. It's much further away. That gets a lot better results, especially with the lights off, than my full living room background that I usually have with all the lights on, as there's so many big shapes and colors and it just kind of confuses the detection. What's impressive is that when it is detecting right, the edges of the cut around you look completely natural. You can't even tell that there was ever something back behind you in the first place. And you get to avoid the fuzzy green outline and color cast that a green or blue screen would cause. However, chairs are a problem. The team had only a limited number of chairs behind users to train AI on, and my primary chair, the Ergo Chair 2, in gray, confuses it even more. There's no chair detection toggle like some options, so you know, the chair is always left in, but if your chair does not look like what it expects, you could have some issues. It seems to prefer black chairs, so swapping to my black Respawn chair for the most part worked better, or if you have a mid-back chair like the one I'm sitting in right now, it works even better because for the most part you're going to be blocking it with your body. If your camera is angled down too far and it shows like your armrests and stuff like that, that could cause a lot of weird artifacting too, because it has really, like, you can't expect it to train for that, so you'll probably want to crop off the bottom of that feed a little bit. So I tested this in a lot of different scenarios. Different color shirts really didn't seem to have a negative impact. Neither did setting up an edge or kicker light to, you know, identify your hair separately from your background. That didn't really seem to matter at all. Even if my hair was super dark and I had a dark background, it never cut into my head or anything like that. So while it may still have artifacts of bringing other things into the frame, unlike other options, I never had artifacts of it actually removing parts of my body or head, which is freaking impressive. It also seemed to handle hats fine as well too. Headsets are kind of hit and miss as usual, which is true of even cheap green screen setups, so there's that. It seemed to detect them fine and didn't really crop them out so much as the gaps between the headset and my head, you know, usually still showed the background more often than not. Desktop microphones seem to be a really big problem, however. I didn't have a ton of time to test this particularly out too much, but just pulling my main microphone down in front of me, it immediately keyed out the whole mic arm and the mic itself, right in front of my face. Obviously that produces undesirable results, even if I could have some weird fun with it. What's cool is that the effects here work regardless of how sharp or in or out of focus your camera is, since it's looking for the human face first. Since it's looking for the human shape first. Obviously it's gonna, you know, work better with more detail and more focus, but even when my A7S II's autofocus started acting up, I didn't really have any issues. Obviously my image was blurry, but in terms of background removal, it was fine. I also didn't see too significantly better of an improvement going between different quality webcams. I had worse results with this cheapo webcam that only did 30 FPS at 4:3 aspect ratios according to Nvidia Broadcast, but it wasn't that much worse. Here's a quick comparison between Nvidia Broadcast versus a typical mediocre Twitch green screen setup. While the chroma key removes things more effectively and it's not going to magically just put something else in your background, it leaves a green outline and color cast on me, which I just hate seeing in videos. There's definitely a trade-off. I also tested to see if, as with the now defunct old Personify Chroma Cam software that shipped with the C922 webcam, if using a green screen would actually help the background removal software. It kind of did, because now you don't have a background, you just have the green, but then you still have the green cast and outline. Meh. Before we go any further, let's talk about how this double round of content was possible for me this week. I'm now part of Nebula. I've partnered with a bunch of creative friends for our own platform where we don't have to worry about demonetization or fighting an algorithm. Here I'll have all of my normal content that you know and love, but also extra and exclusive content that goes beyond what I can show on YouTube, all ad-free. The platform combines some of the top education creators from YouTube as well as unique collaborative opportunities that you might not normally see. And while they were at it, the people at CuriosityStream saw what was happening over at Nebula and wanted to partner up to support even more educational content. So now we have a deal with them where if you click the link in the description below, you have access to CuriosityStream and all of its great educational and documentary content, as well as all of Nebula's content from us education YouTubers for free. And CuriosityStream is offering a 26% discount on their annual price, which knocks it down to less than $15 for a year's worth of content and supporting educational creators like myself. While you're there, I recommend checking out great content such as Alex Goes Bananas, which is where Alex Nickel discovers the pop culture I grew up with and makes me feel like I'm getting old, because I am. Making this video made me feel like I was getting old. as well as another Alex, Low Spec Gamer's new podcast Genesis, which covers the origin stories of your favorite YouTubers. If you want to support my channel and support educational content on the whole, check out curiositystream.com/epos to sign up for just $15 per year. That's better than most ways you can support channels, so thanks. While it's all cool and great, there are some frustrating limitations with the software at this point in time. I already mentioned the current state of device support, so I won't talk about that too much more, but there are a couple other points. Firstly, you cannot use your webcam in Nvidia Broadcast and a streaming app at the same time. This is a Windows limitation. That means that there's no easy way to have different scenes where one has the background removed over top of your gameplay and then the other doesn't, for like just chatting or something. And there's also no hotkey support for disabling it either, so you have to use the tray icon with your mouse, which can be a problem in the middle of a stream. And this is because not being able to use it in two places is because it occupies your webcam like any other program in Windows, and Windows does not allow UVC devices to be shared through multiple apps at a time. This will be a frustration for some. Secondly, and probably most importantly, IMO, you have no way to actually adjust your webcam when it runs through Nvidia Broadcast. You can't bring up the UVC controls to adjust your brightness, your gain, your exposure, your white balance, and so on. You can, of course, apply color correction to the Nvidia Broadcast camera in OBS or whatever after the fact, but you can't set any manual controls. It kicks it back to auto. So if your exposure is wrong on the auto settings, you cannot fix it. So most of my webcam samples just have me completely overexposed because I can't adjust that. I tried setting it using the UVC controls in OBS and then deactivating it and adding it to Nvidia Broadcast, but that just kicked it all back to auto settings, so there was no way to fix it. This needs to be a high priority to fix with this software, in my opinion. Next up, we have performance numbers. I discussed this a bit in my RTX 3080 review, but I want to cover performance more. First, in terms of performance, is stability. Again, this is still in beta, it's still being worked on. And while I found it to be more stable than the initial runs of RTX Voice in the first place, I did have instances where the camera would go gray on me or just like disappear or deactivate itself, and I'd need to restart the whole app. Or something else would happen and I would not find my devices at all until I completely rebooted my system. Little quirks. While Nvidia Broadcast does not use the 3D game rendering part of your graphics card, at least for the main workload, it still does use cores on it to do the processing, and that will impact your game while streaming with it enabled. The severity of the impact will depend on your game, however. Generally, games in general will see a minor impact, but newer DirectX 12 and ray tracing enabled games will see major impacts, especially when using both voice and camera effects at the same time. I did not test any with speaker enabled as well, but I would imagine that adds just a little bit more extra load too. I found that in some cases, using both camera and mic had no extra impact over just the camera, while in other cases it had a pretty huge impact. It was kind of inconsistent. I also ran into a weird issue with Modern Warfare 2019's Warzone specifically, which is an example of a DX12 RTX heavy game. While enabling the camera effects and streaming in OBS, it just tanked my Warzone performance to like 40 FPS, even in 1080p, until I stopped and started streaming again in OBS, where it worse relaunched OBS and got everything going again. It was pretty inconsistent. I did not include those results in my charts because that seemed to be a bug and I was able to recreate the same thing and get back up at 100 FPS or whatever, but it was really frustrating and happened a lot. Modern Warfare 2019 is also a game where having both voice and camera on would definitely have an impact on how smooth and responsive the game felt compared to normal streaming. So let's start with that game in terms of performance numbers. At 4K, I found the broadcast effects to have a 14% impact on game performance while streaming with reasonable settings on the 3080 over just streaming normally, with a 23% impact on the 2080 over normal streaming. So the 3080 with its extra RT cores can handle it better than the 2080, but there's still an impact on both. And this will continue to be a trend throughout all of the games I test. At 1080p 240, there was basically no impact on using it while streaming. It was actually less of an impact than enabling max quality in NVINC settings on the 3080, but the 2080 suffered a 20% performance impact while using the broadcast software. At 1440p, enabling the broadcast effects on the 3080 saw an 18% impact over normal streaming, but if you enabled RTX in the game, since it uses similar cores, I wanted to test that bumped up to a 23% impact on your game. In Apex Legends, at 4K, the 3080 had a 16% performance hit, moving from normal streaming to streaming with broadcast, while the 2080 had just a 13% with the camera on, but when you used camera and voice, that went up to a 30% performance hit. At 1080p 240, the RTX 3080 had only a 10% impact from the broadcast effects, while the 2080 had a 19% from the camera effect and a 30% again from both of them being enabled. So again, the 2080 does not have the RT power to keep up here. At 1440p 144, the 3080 only suffered a 22% impact from both broadcast effects. Last game here, Rainbow Six Siege. At 4K 60, the 3080 saw a 15% impact with both effects, whereas the 2080 only had a 12.5% impact from both, but the frame rates that the two cards were running the game at are very different. At 1080p 240, both the 3080 and the 2080 only had a 6% impact over normal streaming, so they both tied there. And then at 1440p 144, the 3080 only had an 8% impact with both effects. That brings us to conclusion time. Overall, this technology is phenomenal, and I cannot wait to see where it goes from here, because it can only get better. However, I really want them to also develop it as an After Effects and Resolve effect or plugin, so that I can have more time per frame to process, which should really produce better results. I hate that all of this technology is so focused on just real-time performance that, you know, it gets you like 80% of the way there in real time. And so theoretically, without doing it in real time, by doing it in a video editor where it can have all the time in the world, it should get you 100% of the way there. But none of those tools ever end up, or at least conveniently, ending up in post-processing suites or software. And so doing that by hand, you know, rotoscoping or whatever, would take forever. It would be hell. So I really hope this comes up as a video editor plugin soon. It works like magic, but it's not actually magic, so your results may vary, and the impact on your streaming or on your game while streaming can be immense depending on the game. Like, I wasn't even going to try Control with it because stoked to see future development from this and future training. Of course, as I mentioned, you can submit your own samples. If everybody submits, they have a lot more data points to work with and whatever, but overall it's an incredibly valuable tool for streamers and content creators. And I'm so glad that they're releasing for this. I know I sound like a shill when I talk about it, but the amount of, you know, time, energy, and development that Nvidia has invested into streamers with software like this just cannot be overstated. It's so freaking cool. Try it out for free, give feedback, and let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Go subscribe on Nebula if you'd like, or YouTube for more tech education and stream content. I'm your stream professor, Epos Fox. I'll see you next time. I really need to stop talking now. I'm so glad this crazy weekend is over. Woo!